Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a genuine pleasure to see you all here this morning. NDY is delighted to host this International Women's Day event and grateful that each of you can share it with us. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land on which we meet, the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. I would like to pay respect to their elders, past and present. Firstly, I would like to introduce two very important people within our organisation today. Jen Gowland, as our Director of People and Culture. Where's Jen? Jen Gowland. As our Director of People and Culture, Jen is here this morning as International Women's Day forms part of our broader diversity and inclusion agenda. This area of our people strategy is key focus for 2018, both internally and externally. Jen represents NDY as the implementation lead for the Consult Australia Male Champions of Change and is working closely with peers across the industry and competitor firms to ensure that as an industry we are all contributing to the progression of the diversity and inclusion agenda. And secondly, Benita Husband. Benita works with our CEO and is a member of our group executive implementing our 2020 strategy and working with key clients as a technical advisor. Benita has been involved in encouraging more women and girls to participate in engineering since she was an engineering student herself. She continues to champion diversity in our industry and has been recognised with 2 awards from the National Association of Women in Construction, or NAWIC, featured in Engineers Australia's publication Inspiring Stories of Female Engineers. And last year was also featured in the International Celebrating Women campaign. As a mother of 2 young children, each year Benita likes to reflect on the meaning of International Women's Day, and she feels inspired by this year's theme, Press for Progress. We have the pleasure of hearing from 2 very inspirational women this morning, and to introduce our guests, I will hand over to Benita Husband. Thanks, Benita.
Good morning. I'm really happy here to be in Sydney again this year for NDY's marquee event for International Women's Day. As John mentioned, each year I try and reflect on what International Women's Day means to me and what I personally can do. I loved reading the inspirational quotes that have been shared under the theme Press for Progress. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to come and have a look at those which we've printed out, and feel free to share those on social media. One of the ideas behind Pressing for Progress is that we will celebrate successful women, which we're going to do this morning, hearing from 2 of them. Both of these women are in Melbourne now, but they've lived and worked all around the world, including here in Sydney. And because they are so accomplished, I will need to refer to my notes to make sure I don't miss anything out. Our first speaker is Mhairi Donohoe. Mhairi is Program Director at the University of Melbourne with the STEM-M Major Projects team. STEM-M, of course, being Science, Technology, Engineering, Maths and Medicine. As you might guess when you hear her accent, Mhairi is originally from Scotland, having graduated from the University of St Andrews studying biochemistry. She spent 8 years working as a biomedical researcher in Berkeley, California and Cambridge, UK for the United States Department of Energy and the UK Medical Research Council. In an ill-advised attempt to escape the lab, she spent 4 weeks in London working for the BBC in the Specialist Factual Unit, which was best known at the time for producing Top Gear. And she did that as a research assistant on a program about fish. After a hasty retreat back to Cambridge, she moved to Sydney and successfully transitioned out of the lab into a project management role as the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute was constructing a new state-of-the-art research facility in Darlinghurst. Mhairi now lives in Melbourne with her 2 children and husband, who's also a biochemist from Glasgow. She graduated from the Melbourne Business School in 2016 with an MBA and is now steadily working her way through the Melbourne Biomedical Precinct partners, depending on their appetite for major infrastructure projects. Mhairi spent the last 12 months coordinating the University of Melbourne's response to the construction of the Metro Tunnel and Parkville Rail Station in the Melbourne Biomedical Precinct. She is now responsible for leading a program of major projects that support the university's interest in transforming the student experience in the teaching and learning of medicine and growing its presence in medical-related research. In her spare time, Mhairi sits on the board of the Brunswick Tool Library and is currently training for the 50-kilometre Oxfam Trail Walk in Melbourne, which she'll complete in March as a member of the Wandering Trailberries team. And I've heard from people who go to have meetings with Mhairi that she makes them walk around the campus. So I'm going to hand over to Mhairi now, but we'll save questions till the end after our second speaker. Thanks, Mhairi.
Thank you very much, Benita. I'm not sure what to say. I think Benita's taken my notes, but I'll try and revisit some of my background for you. As Benita mentioned, I'm originally from Glasgow. I moved to Australia about 12 years ago, but I studied originally biochemistry at the University of St Andrews, and when I finished up there, I wasn't really very sure what I wanted to do with my career. I had studied biochemistry, a very science-based project degree, but I did know that I wanted to go to the US, and I really wanted to go there and do Work America for 3 months, and so I was very lucky in that I was offered a student placement at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which, as Benita mentioned, was part of the Department of Energy. So I went out there, worked there for 3 months, and at the end of that 3-month placement, they offered me an ongoing position, and I absolutely loved working out there at the time. It was around the dot-com boom. There were lots of new biotech companies starting up, lots of new technology companies setting up as well. Working through that was really interesting because obviously the dot-com bubble at that time then burst, and then you could see the impact on California as that industry died off, and all of a sudden my rent, I couldn't find somewhere to live for a couple of months. I ended up living in a bed and breakfast. But then all of a sudden when that dot-com bubble burst, the apartment that I lived in, they started dropping my rent because so many people were leaving California. So I finished up, I was looking at Cambridge in the UK. One of my friends went to work there. She was a forensic scientist. And I went to visit her and I just fell in love with the city. It was absolutely beautiful. So I moved to Cambridge. I started working for a biotech company. And they were doing quite well, but of course with that collapse of the economy in California, the same thing started to happen in Cambridge as well. On the day that I arrived in my workplace, they'd frozen all the hires, and the people that they'd recruited after me, they told them that unfortunately they couldn't join the company anymore. So it's quite tough times, but I really enjoyed working there, and then I wanted to work for the Medical Research Council. That's where it was the birthplace of molecular biology in the UK, set up in the 1950s, originally coming out of the physics department at Cambridge University. So I went to work there, worked for a very inspiring woman called Daniela Stock, and she was very ambitious as well. She wanted to head up her own team, and she saw a role advertised in Sydney at the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute. So she showed me the role and she said, "What do you think? Do you think it looks good?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it looks fantastic." So she came over, she interviewed for the position. She travelled around Australia as well, and she came back and she said, "Look, we have to go. Those facilities out there in Australia, they're absolutely fantastic. You wouldn't believe the infrastructure that they have. They're building all these new facilities. It looks like a really fantastic opportunity." And she asked me if I would come out and help her set up the lab. So I agreed. I was a little bit hesitant, and my husband and I moved out with her back in 2006. And the other reason I wanted to move out is she mentioned that there was a woman working at the Victor Chang who was the operations manager there, and she was studying an MBA. And Daniela knew that that was something that interested me from my time when I worked in California. And I knew that to get onto an MBA program, I really needed to work on my work experience. So she said, "Well, there's this woman there who's the operations manager. She's studying an MBA at the moment. They're building a new facility. It sounds like it would be interesting to go out there and see what they're doing." So I did. We set up the lab. The person that was studying the MBA got a new role. And I put myself forward a couple of months before I knew she was graduating and said, "Really think you need to consider me in this operations role." And at the time, the director of Victor Chang said, no, you can't have that job. But I was very persistent and said, "I really, really want to do that. I really want to be involved in this." And they eventually backed down and said, "All right, you can have the job." Probably couldn't find anyone else. So I moved into that job. I tried as hard as I could to do a really great job as they finished off the construction of that facility. And they started to give me more and more responsibility, and I met some people down at Melbourne, and I could see that a lot of money, and there was a lot of investment down in Melbourne in the Parkville Biomedical Precinct. There's a lot of jobs coming up, and someone said to me, "We're looking for someone with your type of experience to help us with the Melbourne Brain Centre construction at Parkville and Austin," and asked me if I was interested in going for an interview, and I said yes, would love to. So I interviewed down there. was successful in getting the role and moved myself, and by that point I had an 18-month-old daughter, Julia. So we moved down, finished the construction, and every day I went past the Royal Children's Hospital. I don't know if you know it, down in Melbourne. It's an absolutely beautiful facility. And I was going past and I was thinking, God, that would have been a really good project to be involved in. I can't believe I missed that. But I was walking past the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre every day on my way to work, and I thought, I really want to work there. And some people from Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre came to visit me at work. They did a tour around the building, and eventually a role came up with them, and I applied for that role and was successful there. And I realised when I was practising this talk, I was going to start talking about all my successes, but in amongst all of this, there was plenty of jobs that I applied for and wasn't successful, but I just kept hanging on in there. When I worked for the Peter Mac, I thought now is the right time for me to do an MBA, so I applied to the University of Melbourne and got into the Melbourne Business School. So I was studying there, and a position came up at the University of Melbourne as Director of Infrastructure and Facilities for Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. And I applied for that position with a lot of support actually from the Melbourne Business School and their careers advisors, and was successful in getting that role. And I've been with the University of Melbourne for about 3 years, and as Benita mentioned, I'm now in the major projects team. So Benita, when she asked me to come and give this talk, she said, how would you describe International Women's Day to your children? And I have 2 children. I have a daughter, Julia, she's 9. She was born in Sydney, and Harris, my son, who's 4. And I just thought, oh God, if I tell Julia about International Women's Day, it's just going to trigger a whole load of additional questions that are actually I found quite difficult to answer for her. And I could just imagine her astonishment about some of the things that I was saying. And I was thinking, you know, I could tell her about how International Women's Day started over 100 years ago, and it was originally set up. The first meeting was in New York, following in Denmark, and they set it up as a strategy in order for women to get the vote. And I could imagine Julia saying to me, women couldn't vote. And I could say, well, that's right. A lot of people actually couldn't vote at that time, men included, and so there was a large movement around about that period where people eventually were all given the opportunity to vote. And then if she said to me, well, why do we still need International Women's Day? Surely you know, everybody can vote now. And I would have to say, well, if we look at the World Economic Forum, and I know you heard a little bit about this last year, if you look at their gender equality report, while Australia does well in education and health, the 2 areas in which it doesn't do particularly well is in political empowerment and economic participation. And currently, Australia is ranked 35th out of 144 countries globally. And I would say, you know, most people would think in terms of fairness and in terms of economic participation, if you do equal work, you should expect to get paid equally for that work as well. But that's not necessarily the case. And I realized that some people don't even know that there's a gender pay gap, and this came to me when I graduated from the University of Melbourne in 2016. My dad, who's an engineer, came over for my graduation. And he was asking me, he said, oh, MBAs are quite expensive, how are you paying for this? And I said, oh, well, you know, Australia's got this great system, the fee help system, I'm using that. And of course, I got a scholarship too. And I made a joke, this was a joke. I said, I had a scholarship, that helped, because obviously there's a gender pay gap. So if there was a man on the cohort who's getting, you know, working in the same role as me, he'd be getting paid more than me. And my dad said, what? That doesn't exist. What are you talking about? There's no such thing as a gender pay gap. And this is in 2016. Sorry, Dad, if you see this. And luckily, his wife was standing next to me. She said, how could you not know that there's a gender pay gap? Anyway, in terms of good news, I think there's one group of women in Australia where a gender pay gap doesn't exist. And they actually out-earn their male counterparts by 0.4%. And those are judges. I don't know if you saw that in your newspaper last year. And you might say, well, maybe there aren't that many female judges here in Australia. That's actually a reasonable number. So it's around 35% of judges in Australia are women. And if you wonder why are they marginally out-earning their male counterparts, and the reason for that, or the speculation around that, is that their salaries are set by independent external third-party tribunals. Just give you that for thought. And then other explanations about in areas or industries where there are low levels of pay gap, you usually have a balanced gender on the executive team. And that for every additional woman on the executive team, that gender pay gap reduces by about 3 points. until the gap is about 10%. If there are no women on the executive team, then usually the gap is about 20% on average. So just moving on to political empowerment, Australia's ranked 48th globally compared to other countries. And its ranking for women in government continues to decline. And the representation of women within politics here is about 30%, and the UN considers that marginal for the ability for women to influence decision making. So you might say, well, why do we need women in Parliament? And I think, well, to be truly globally successful, you need to have people, a range of different people with different experiences representing your country. And one of the principles undermining democratic government is that Parliament should represent the will of the people. And as women make up approximately 50% of the Australian population, then you would expect to have, in a democratic country, society, equal representation there. And in terms of why women are underrepresented in Australia, many people suspect that it's to do with the nature of the electoral system, and the nature and processes of the political parties. So I just wanted to do a small plug for the University of Melbourne here, and in 2015 they launched the Pathway to Politics program. And this program takes 25 women each year, University of Melbourne students or alumni, and to teach them with the skills that they need to reach elected office at the local and national level. And the funding for this program is free if you're interested in taking a look, and it's through the generosity of the Trawala Foundation. The program's led by presenters across the entire political spectrum, includes politicians, pollsters, public speaking professionals, campaign strategists and other leading Australian figures. And hopefully some of you will feel inspired enough today to take a look at that program and press for change. Thank you.
Thanks. We will return to Mhairi for questions, but before that, we'll go to our second speaker, Josie Costanzo. Josie is the General Manager of Austral Bricks in Victoria and a champion of change for women in the manufacturing and building industries. She studied accounting with the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants while living in London and travelling the world. She later became CPA qualified, and she also completed her Executive MBA at the Melbourne Business School, which is where she, Mhairi and I all first met. She started her manufacturing experience working for George Weston Foods at Tip Top Bakeries, I believe here in Sydney actually. Adelaide, sorry. Then she went on to Schweppes before starting with Austral Bricks 7 years ago. Josie first started at Austral Bricks as a finance controller and has risen through the ranks since. Last year, as part of Challenge Your Boss to raise money for the Children's Cancer Institute, Josie accepted the challenge of her colleagues by dressing up as Harley Quinn to abseil down a building in Melbourne CBD. Outside of work, she enjoys spending time with her very active 4- and 5-year-old boys, keeping fit and still getting to travel the world, albeit for much shorter periods of time than she used to. Josie's also a keen follower of sport, and I'm envious at the number of corporate box tickets she seems to get. I look forward to hearing from her now. Thanks, Josie.
Thank you, Benita. Thanks for the introduction, and great talk, Mhairi. That was very interesting. So International Women's Day is a fantastic initiative just to get people talking about the current issues, especially in our industry on gender inequality. So today I'll just go through a little bit on what that means to me and the challenges I find within our business and within our industry. So I especially love the theme this year too, Press for Progress. We need to see change. We need to inspire others to follow in our path and help break down the barriers that we came across ourselves and to make it easier for the next line of women to follow. There needs to be real change before we can really say and get to gender equality. So it's the small changes that will make a difference. It's the things we do every single day, and it's the behaviours we won't accept and we will change ourselves. So first of all, let me give you a little bit of history on my background. So I'm originally from Adelaide and started out probably like most people here, just didn't know what to do with my life when I finished school. And everything pointed in an accounting direction for me. I always found numbers very easy to work with, which is probably great, same as engineers. And yeah, just felt really strongly that it's just something I didn't want to do. Didn't think it suited my personality type. So people that know me always say, can't believe you're an accountant. So before deciding either way, I decided to pack my bags and head to London. So went on a working holiday. I was only 20 years old, did start study and didn't finish. And was hoping just to work in bars and have a bit of fun. But when I got there, realised that, hey, the pay wasn't great. I actually still remember how much it was, £3.17 an hour. So there was no way I was going to travel on that money. So I got a real job as an assistant accountant and, earning at least 3 times as much. So after doing that for 4 years, travelling the world, having a great time, did start my study over there as well with SEMA and got some great work experience and decided to come back home. So I went back to Adelaide. I lasted 2 days and went, I cannot live back here after London. And as much as I love Adelaide, no way. So I packed my bags and moved to Sydney. So in Sydney, this is in mid-20s now, I was just still absolutely in denial that accounting was going to be my path. And I actually went to uni and did sports science for 6 months, thinking that that's what I wanted to do. While working as an accountant and already a manager of a team, still just did not want to do this. So it wasn't until I was about 28 that I actually said, this course has chosen me and this is what I'm going to do. And finished my study, got my CPA and my SEMA qualification, and really just never gave it a second thought and threw everything into it. But I guess what was always important to me at that time is I always knew I was going to be successful. I just never had anyone telling me that it wasn't going to happen for me. So for my decision, it was with which career path was that going to be. So a bit about my family, which it's only been probably the last 5 years that I really reflect back on this, is, my nana, she worked her entire life. And, it's just really sad we didn't talk about this as a family, but I actually found a lot of this out at her funeral. She was the first female to be employed by the Lutheran Church in Adelaide and actually be paid for her work. My mother worked her entire life, she still does. I grew up going to before and after school care with my 2 sisters, while my dad worked as well. And it didn't seem strange to me at all to have working females in careers and, more importantly, working mothers. So my family has always believed in equal opportunity, and I think going through the school system in the late 80s and early 90s, gender equality never really seemed to be an issue. I often talk about this with my girlfriends from school at this time, and we just all agreed. We always thought we could do anything and be anyone, and we just didn't realise there was a gender pay gap, that you would get treated differently when you actually started your working life. So I also find a little bit of my mum's story quite fascinating, which is probably very similar to most females of her generation. She has 3 brothers and 1 sister. She had to leave school at 15, so her brothers could keep studying and finish their education. And so did her sister. And they often didn't have enough food for everyone. So my nana went first without food, and then the 2 sisters. It was always got to make sure you look after these men. And she was determined to change that, and having 3 daughters, she did. And so I look back on that and I just think, I have 2 young boys. I can't imagine them growing up thinking that. And, and I'm sure most people in the room can't either. And looking back at that time, there's always been this one conversation that stood out to me. So when I actually applied for university in Sydney to do sports science, the man that was doing the admissions, he said to me, what is your plan? How are you going to study and work full time in a job that seems quite demanding? And I just was quite baffled, saying, of course, what are you talking about? I'm going to keep working. I want to keep my options open. I want a career. I think this is what I'm going to do. I need enough money because I want to keep travelling. And I want to buy a house. And I'm going to have a family. I'm going to do everything. And he looked me in the face and said, there is no one that has it all. No one can do everything, you especially. And that conversation's always stuck with me and kind of drove me to keep doing everything, I think. And, I think having it all, juggling everything, it does really mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think to most females, it just means actually having a career and having a family. And really, I don't think men often think about that at all, but it is really quite topical for women. So as I said before, I did go back, finish my accounting qualifications, went on to do my MBA, where I did meet Mhairi and Benita, and didn't look back. And as we get older and hopefully wiser, we start drowning out that negativity. But it still happened when I was applying for my MBA. Had a lot of comments, especially from my in-laws and work, and going through the process of applying for the funding and the time off. Because, we did have 2 residential days per month as part of our MBA. So, it is a process through work that you've got to apply for that. How are you going to do that with a 1- and 2-year-old at home? And I just never really thought that through and thought, I can do that, no problem. And it is hard, but it is doable. And I think that's what was so inspiring is when I did start the course, we had 17 women, very inspiring. Benita's got kids very similar ages to me, and we all, you know, and then Mhairi, her youngest, is the same age as my youngest as well, and a lot of us were in the same position. And, you know, I think, you know, this is the point that you really just got to drown out that negativity and keep doing what you got to do. So, yeah, who would have thought? I enjoyed accounting in the end, and so 15 years ago, got into manufacturing, which I think was a big turning point for me. Got a really good commercial accounting manager role, and then worked my way up through Tip-Top, Schweppes, and then into Austral Bricks, managing teams and working as the commercial managers and financial controllers of divisions. And then, yeah, almost 2 years ago, moved into the general manager role for Victoria for Austral Bricks. So I think, you know, you get up across a lot of tough parts in that path. You know, it is a very male-dominated industry, all of manufacturing, in food and also in the building and construction. And, you know, it's really just believing in yourself, I think. So, look, there's two reasons I like to tell that story. Number one is it's okay not to know what you want to do in your 20s. You know, you work it out eventually. And, you know, I always push a lot of people, and, you know, I talk to a lot of young people, and, you know, my younger sister's actually 13 years younger than me, and talk to her a lot about it. It's okay not to know what you want to do. You know, you will work it out at some point, and then when you do, that's when you really got to put everything into it. And the other point is I just always knew that I wanted a career, and I was going to be successful. There was just no way that wasn't going to happen for me. So, you know, believing in yourself is the most important part. So, just working in the building and construction industry, obviously we all know it's very male-dominated. You know, yesterday we did an event back in Melbourne, went to the Engineers Australia International Women's Day event, and went around all our customer base and went, okay, we want to take some senior female leaders in the building businesses, and we actually really struggled to find some good numbers. So although we ended up with a really great bunch of women, there is just far too less of us than there should be. So this is what really needs to sit within us to help break down those barriers and really make a better pathway for the people coming behind us. So look, I'll just move on to talk a bit about my company and what we're doing to really break down that gender inequality. We are a building products company, so we manufacture building products here in Australia. We make bricks, masonries, roof tiles, precast timber, and we import panels and sell them all around Australia, and actually export some overseas. So we only had our first female appointed to the board in 2014. We have been a public company for over 40 years, and we have been trading as a company for over 100 years. So yes, we have one female out of 7 board members, you know, but yeah, obviously there's some room to move there. And we currently have an executive team of 27 with 4 females in that team, including myself. So we do have a diversity council set up now that is really looking to how we can actually make some real change here. But yeah, look, what I like to focus on is really what I can control, not what I can't. So although it's good to talk big picture and think about what we can do ourselves in breaking down that, I like to come back to really what can I control? And what I can control is the business that I manage. So there's a lot of things that we're putting into our business. You know, we make sure there's equal men and women that get to the shortlist stage of all positions advertised, and then we choose the best person for the job. You know, we actually have some really clear all-female areas in our business, and we have, you know, clear all-male areas. So we're really trying to get that better diversity in, and this is diversity, not just gender, but, you know, cultural diversity and everything else as well. So, but given today's all about International Women's Day, I'll keep it about gender, but yeah, we're really looking at getting a wide range of diversity there. So we also word our ads to recruit both genders. I think they used to be quite male orientated, and we also provide flexible hours and encourage people to take that up, and that's for men and women. And looking at the senior management team, we do have one female out of a group of 8 of us, and myself as well, and my sales manager. So, you know, it's really about trying to get that next level down, so we've got a better pathway for the next lot of females coming through. So I just wanted to share with you a talk I went to a couple of years ago on International Women's Day. It always kind of stuck with me. I really liked what it was about. So it was kind of talking about the difference between netball and basketball. So who here played netball growing up, or still does? Oh, really? Only that many people? And then who here played basketball growing up and still does? All right, well, hardly anyone put up their hand. Usually more people in the show. Okay, so what I found, normally that's got a lot of females putting up their hands for netball and a lot of men putting up their hands for basketball. And the event I went to, that is exactly what happened. But anyway, I just found it really interesting talking about the rules there. So let's have a think about that. So netball, you're in positions. Only the goal shooter and goal attack are allowed to shoot the goals, all right? And no other positions are allowed to go outside of their areas of the court. You are not allowed to cross that line or get into that circle if you're not in those positions. You can't run with the ball. Once you get the ball, you've got to stop and you need to pass it on. You're not allowed to take the ball out of someone else's hands. Or you've got to wait for them to pass it on and try and intercept it. And then let's compare that to basketball. Every player can go everywhere in the court. Every player is allowed to shoot a goal. And you can run with the ball, you can get the ball out of other people's hands. So you get the picture, right? So I just found that really, really interesting. And, and I do think that some of those rules come into the workplace, and I think that's a lot of just how the different genders think. So, yeah. And look, I didn't want to come here today and sort of run through the numbers with the studies. I think we all agree that diversification, companies that diversify outperform companies that don't. I think that's, all those studies are done. I think it's all believed, and I think that's where we're all trying to move to now. And, so I didn't want to really go through too many of them. But I feel the biggest thing we can do right now is really share our stories. Make the small changes one by one and really try and leave our workplace in a better place than where it was when we started. And we need to really drive some action, and it's all the small behaviours that just aren't acceptable anymore that we really need to work on. I just always reflect back to just those little conversations, and this is a story from about 18 months ago at my house, where I've got my niece who was 12 at the time saying to my then 3-year-old, "Stop crying like a girl, you sound like a girl." I was just absolutely horrified. There's none of that talk in this house. Girls cry better than boys. He should be happy to cry like a girl when he cries like a boy, because he is a boy. And she was horrified. And I just think it's all those little behaviours that we really need to change, and that's something that we can all make those choices now to start doing. So I'm grateful I'm in an organisation that is committed to doing just that, and we have big changes for the future. My 2 boys will always be raised respecting everyone, making sure that they are inclusive and they have that mindset that there is no disadvantages. It just is completely foreign to them, and everyone has an equal shot, and hopefully everyone getting paid equally for it one day. But that's a whole other conversation. So #Press for Progress. Let's make real progress in the next 12 months. Share our stories, inspire other women, break down the barriers we encounter to make it easier for the next group of women to follow. So thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to say how lucky we are to have such successful and influential women here today to provide this wonderful initiative, being International Women's Day. Mhairi and Josie, it has been an absolute pleasure to hear you about your hard work, your determination you've both put into your achievements and your successful careers. Thank you for your inspirational words and how you are driving change. Mhairi, good luck with your Oxfam. Your persistence will serve you very well, I'm sure. Josie, Adelaide is not that bad. I've been there for the past 5 years and loved it, so. On a serious note, you stated that no one can do it all, and you said that that's also true, and I agree. However, I know that being a father, a husband and a son, that women are expected to be it all, and that's a mindset that we need to change. I'll leave you all this morning with one final thought. In reviewing the International Women's Day website last night, I was absolutely shocked to read that the World Economic Forum's 2017 Global Gender Gap Report found that based on current world progress, gender parity is over 200 years away. This is not good enough. As a father to a young daughter, this strikes a personal nerve, as I'm sure it does to most people within this room and beyond. This is something that we are all accountable for, and something that we should be thinking about every day in the decisions that we make, and not just today. So again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Mhairi and Josie, as well as thank each of you for coming today to recognise the importance of International Women's Day, and I hope you enjoyed the breakfast session. Thank you.